So box.
Hi, my name is Rochelle and you're watching or listening to Box F1 Pod. Welcome to the first episode of 2024. So this week we're going to be talking about, it's going to be a bit of a different episode. We're going to be talking about the new Ferrari movie that came out recently and that disappeared like out of discussion like so fast. I thought it was fine. I don't know why no one's talking about it. It's not nominated for anything that I know of. Just kind of like, it's like it never happened. Anyway, I went and saw it first thing in January. And for those of you who know how I feel about Adam Driver's face, which, sorry, Adam Driver, but like everyone has someone with like a face, you know? But for some reason that felt like the best thing I should do first thing in January, and I did, and it was actually really good. I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of thoughts, particularly around Ferrari then, Ferrari now, how Enzo would feel about F1 in general these days. And just, yeah, so I wanted to talk about the movie. This has seemed like a good avenue to unload all my thoughts. But of course, there has been a lot happening in the F1 world in the last few weeks. So we will dive into all of that as well. So without further ado, it's time for the digital warm-up. Lap 1. Silly season came early, I guess. So first up, Guenther Steiner was unceremoniously fired from Haas. Although in theory, it has been reported that Guenther's contract technically expired and they just chose not to renew it. I'm not sure if it actually matters because it still seems like it was sudden and he like wasn't informed until last minute, because he did an interview and said that he didn't really get a chance to say goodbye to anyone, which seems a bit harsh, but that's just Gene in a nutshell, isn't it? Guenther himself seemed to like take the high road. He didn't seem too salty about it, although he seemed to disagree with the idea that it's his fault that they're number 10. We all know it's not his fault. It's Gene's fault for being so stingy and refusing to put any actual money into the car, and the result is just a bunch of car parts on wheels that they hope makes it to the end of every race. But whatever, let's blame Guenther. The biggest loss is, of course, Guenther as a personality. Apparently Netflix is devastated. Guenther said they can send him a check and he's happy to come on board. But it's really tragic. It is a huge loss for Netflix. He was a major personality there, and just, I still can't understand. Like, Gene really needs to reassess his priorities. Like, it's clearly not Guenther's fault. I'm not saying that Guenther's the key, but like, you know. In other news, the team formerly known as Alfa Romeo is now Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber. We all knew that Alfa Romeo was leaving this year, which makes me really sad because I do love Alfa Romeo as a car. And they're such like a key part of F1 history. It seems kind of sad that they're no longer going to be represented on the grid. But that's that. They're gone. Audi is coming in 2026. So we have this like awkward like interim years. And I guess they thought the best thing to do would be to name themselves Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber. Don't know why. And then the team came out and clarified that they're actually not going to be known as Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber, but just Stake F1. And I don't know if that's like colloquial or if they're like officially changing their name. I'm not entirely sure. Still kind of weird. Kick F1, Stake F1. Sauber probably would have been best, but I guess money's king. Whoever the fuck Kick is paid a lot of money. I will be going into more detail about all these name changes and everything in the 2024 primer coming out in a couple of weeks right before the season starts. But just wanted to give a quick update on everything that's been going on. But yeah, give it up for Stake F1. Does sound better than Kick, TBH, but like still. But also, like, what do Guan Yu and Valtteri drive now? Because they were driving beautiful Alfa Romeos. Are they driving Audis already? Or what are they driving? Anything they want? Alpha Tari's new name is so bad, everyone thought it was a troll. Like, everyone thought it for sure was not a real thing, but it is. It's called Visa Cash App RB. The word app is in their name. And apparently the idea is that it'll be shortened to RB by commentators because that's not going to be confusing with Red Bull and RB. And also their logo is like a bull. It's just weird. Apparently Zach Brown has raised concerns about the relationship between AlphaTauri and Red Bull, which, considering it's literally in their name now, I think RB stands for Red Bull. It's a pretty good guess. And the picture's a bull. I mean, I can't find what the RB actually stands for, but it's less subtle than AlphaTauri. I get his concern totally. Not the only team on the grid with that connection, Williams, Mercedes. Perhaps not as overt. Williams is not Williams, Mercedes. But also, Zach Brown loves to raise concerns, loves an open letter, loves to not like stir the pot, but also like stir the pot. I honestly wouldn't, no, I can't say that. No, I can't say that. It's just so funny how every team principal has their own way of meddling. Like Christian overtly stirs the pot and like has like a twinkle in his eye. Toto stirs the pot very openly, either through emotional rants or by giving very clipped like PR responses in the media where he's clearly stirring the pot, but like pretending like he's not. And then there's Zach Brown, who's raising concerns, but he's stirring the pot. There is some consistency on the grid. Charles has re-signed with Ferrari beyond the 2024 season, which almost seems worse than a multi-year deal because it just seems like he will be indefinitely suffering, like forever. Lando has also re-signed with McLaren for what was described as an extended multi-year contract. Also vague, but it seems to have an end date. And also he's not quite in the same psychological torture chamber that Charles is stuck in. And I'm sure we'll get the actual year eventually. Side note, okay, McLaren had like a weird like rebrand where they deleted their entire social presence and then posted a video to the sound of Taylor's song going, "Sorry, old Taylor can't come to the phone right now. Why? Because she's dead." And they did like this whole edit of themselves being different. And since then, it seems like they've hired like a team of like 45 social media creators because like they are pumping videos out nonstop. Part of which is Lando's contract signing photo shoot. There must have been like 40 videos specifically like about him signing, different angles, him standing in different places, him arranging something on the ground and then filming it. It's just like a lot for someone that's just continuing to do the same thing. I don't know why that's so necessary. Like, whatever. But also, he is wearing the Abercrombie line of McLaren merch, which also seems a little odd. Relatable, I guess, but odd. Anyway, this photo shoot made me giggle, and whoever's in charge of social media at McLaren now is trying a little hard. Like, they need to calm down a bit. It's a little over the top. Okay, so moving on. Lap 2, off-duty F1. So this is more off-duty me, but I was in Mexico City for my birthday, and I saw a giant Checo pinata, like Checo's car, a pinata of Checo's car, and it was incredible. It was like probably the size of my body. It was huge. There were also a lot less Checo ads than there were last time, or at least there was less variety. There was only one company basically that I saw, but there was also ads for Pato O'Ward, who drives for McLaren and IndyCar. We saw a couple of ads for him, but it was weird because like the resolution was so bad on it that the McLaren kit or the McLaren tracksuit or whatever, their uniform looked red. So at first we're like, oh, it's a Ferrari driver. And they're like, but that's not a Ferrari face. There are very specific faces that are a Ferrari and that's not it. And then we realized it was just like a very discolored orange. But also, sorry, more on me. For my birthday, my friend sent me a couple of really cool, I got an Alex Albon t-shirt, first of all, from one friend. And then another friend sent me this cute little, Carlos car. Very cute. And also, he got me this really cool gin that looks like it comes in like in a gasoline canister, and it's from Italy. So I'm very excited to pop that open once the season begins. Yeah. Apparently, I have one interest, and it's F1, and I love it. All right. So back to the drivers. Who cares about me? The first thing that I really wanted to mention was that George and Fernando seemed to accidentally spend New Year's Eve again together. Like it seemed like they ran into each other and not like it was planned, but they recreated the photo of them, I think it was last year, where they both have like a cigar in their mouths, and they both look like really sweaty and their shirts are unbuttoned. This time Carmen was in the photo, and Fernando clearly didn't have a cigar, so he was like, you know, those things that you blow into at parties, like the whoo, whoo. Why can't I remember what it's called? He had one of those and pretended it was a cigar. Hilarious picture. Don't know how they keep spending New Year's in the exact same place. But George and Carmen like are really on like a world tour. Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? With George Russell. So they were also in Austria. They hung out with Toto and Susie Wolf. They're just like on a road trip, and it's great. In other news, Max, this is one of my favorite stories that has ever come out, but Max Verstappen was in Portugal, and he tried to rent a car, specifically a Mercedes, and the rental company, said no, because apparently they have an insurance policy that, cars that can go a certain speed can only be rented by someone 30 years and older. So Max hadn't been allowed to rent the Mercedes he wanted and had to settle for a slower car. And then the company found out who he was and released a statement apologizing and said next time Max wants to rent a car from them, he is an exception to the rule and can rent whichever car he wants. First of all, it's extra funny because it was a Mercedes, but also it's just funny that Max didn't even try. Like, he could have easily proven to them that, yes, I can drive this car, quite well, actually. But he didn't. He was just like, hey, I'll take a slower car. It's just really funny. And like any driver on the grid, it's actually funny that almost half of them wouldn't be able to rent that car. But all of them are overqualified to drive a fast road car. And most of them would be turned away, which is kind of funny. I think not a lot of them. I'll mention, when I go through the 2024 primer, one of the things I'm adding in is who can rent a car in Portugal, just so we get a grasp on age. But yeah, one of my favorite stories in a while. Also, there has been some interesting content in the last couple of weeks. First of all, they're all back in training, so we've seen a lot of in the gym photos. Always love seeing George Russell breathing very hard in the gym. I don't know why, it's always so funny to me. But they're all working out. And then there's Fernando, who just did a selfie video of him walking through a room going, ready to go again, opening a microwave and putting the phone in the microwave and then closing the door and turning it on. Because like, he's gonna cook, you know? Great content. He for sure deserved TikTok Personality of the Year from Spain. Honestly, I think it should be a global award that he has earned. But whoever is thinking of these content pieces for him deserves half of his salary, at least. Another thing, so if you follow Charles Leclerc for a while, you will know that he does an annual trip into the mountains where he scales a snowy cliffside for no apparent reason, with like a horde of people, including like a videographer and a photographer, and it's like very professional photo shoot as he's scaling an icy cliff. And this year he decided that what would be a great photo shoot is him eating ice cream in the snow, which maybe could have been interesting if this was like a Vogue photo shoot for something in particular, but no, it's just Charles in a giant snowsuit covered to his shoulders in snow eating ice cream. And this poor man had to climb all the way to the top of this fucking mountain with a camera to film Charles eating ice cream. And I don't know who came up with the idea. It's a bizarre photo shoot to begin with, but also the work it took to make it happen is just like a lot. It's a lot. Anyway, Charles is weird online. I think the photo shoot on Twitter or X or whatever, Lando commented and went like, "You okay, bro?" I love Charles. Charles is lucky. He's beautiful and sweet and charming and all the weird stuff you just ignore. Anyway, before we end today's digital warm-up, I wanted to go through a couple of throwbacks because these videos resurfaced for me and they were wild. I will link both of them, obviously, in the show notes. But the first one is of Mark Webber. And if you don't know who Mark Webber is, he is a former Australian. He's still Australian, but he's a former Formula One driver who is Australian. And he is now the manager of like Oscar Piastri. And like, also he might be one of the most beautiful men to have ever stepped foot in the paddock. Like, he is not built like an F1 driver. He's just beautiful. And someone posted an edit of Mark Webber that like starts with an interview of him saying to the camera, "What's the difference between a French kiss and an Australian kiss?" And then he says, "Nothing, but the Australian kiss is down under." And then drops the mic and walks off camera. It was a lot. What I thought was hilarious was I posted it and one box from Australia commented and said, "This is something that only works on anyone outside of Australia. Anyone in Australia would just walk away." Be like, "What the fuck did you just say?" Which honestly, if it happened in real life, I don't think anyone would be like, "Oh my God," like in love, but like flustered for sure. I'm still flustered. I've watched that video like 5 times and I'm still flustered by it. Anyway, that's Mark Webber. And now for a totally different vibe. My friend Dias, friend of the pod, sent me an old clip of Brundle doing a grid walk with Ozzy Osbourne. And I'd like all of you to think back to the Machine Gun Kelly interview, which I think was one of the more unhinged interviews that have happened on the grid. This one I don't think we'll ever top this. So let me play it. I don't know if you're able to hear it.
Aussie, British TV, good to see you.
Good to see you here.
Sharon had some good news this week, I hear.
Yeah, I've got this, I'm currently writing a musical about the life and times of Rasputin, the Mad Monk, and we just got allowing it to go on Broadway.
All right, I'll try and think of a question for that answer. Did you bring the dogs with you?
No, they're all at home shitting.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think we'll move on. Aussie, British TV, good to see you.
Now, I know that Aussie is hard to understand at the best of times, let alone through several audio portals. But just to recap what he said there, Brundle said, "I hear Sharon has had some good news this week," which I don't know, maybe she was pregnant or something. I don't know what happened in that particular year. That was good news for them. And Ozzy responds, "Yeah, I'm writing a musical about Rasputin for Broadway." Which, by the way, is that like the original Hamilton? Because it kind of sounds like it is. And depending on how far he got, I am desperate for Lin-Manuel Miranda to partner with Ozzy Osbourne and deliver like a metal/rap musical about the life and times of Rasputin. And then Brundle responds with, "I don't know what to say to that, but how are the dogs? Or are you here without the dogs or something along those lines? And Ozzy goes, yeah, they're at home shitting. And Brundle goes, okay, I think I'll move on now. Bye. So I think the year of that interview, let's see. I don't know. The only thing I found was an article about Ozzy Osbourne thinking about a Rasputin musical in 2003. So at least 20 years ago, which means that Brundle has had 20 years to perfect his grid walk, and yet they're always awkward. Not that this one can be fully put on him or at all put on him, but his responses are just always so awkward and uncomfortable. He's like, well, I'll leave now. That's what happened with MGK, where he's like, oh, do an air guitar. He's like, I'm leaving. And he's like, oh, no, do a piano. And he's like, I'm going now. And he starts these conversations and then wants to exit immediately. It's quite funny. Anyway, those were the two throwback ones. And I think with that, we're going to end the digital warm-up. On to Ferrari. I was going to say race rhyme, but there's a race rhyme. All right, on to Ferrari. All right, so let's talk the Ferrari movie. Spoiler alert, there will be spoilers in this, although I'm not entirely sure if it's a spoiler since it happened in real life. So, side note, super quick. A couple years ago, after Bohemian Rhapsody came out, it'd been about a year since Bohemian Rhapsody came out, and I was watching it with my friend, and we were a few minutes into the movie. Not a few minutes, we're like 30 minutes in, and I say something like, oh my God, I can't believe Freddie Mercury's dead or something. And my friend goes, he's dead? And I'm like, yeah, he died from AIDS. And she's like, he's gay? And then she got so mad that I ruined the movie for her. But it's a biography, and those are quite well-known facts about Freddie Mercury, that he was gay and that he is dead. And also that he was an exceptional musician. That part she knew. The rest of it was a total surprise, and I don't think she's forgiven me yet. And I don't think I'm at fault, because it is real life facts. I didn't spoil history for her. Anyway, this will contain spoilers was the point of that anecdote. So the movie is basically around Enzo Ferrari, specifically in the year 1957, which was a particularly tumultuous year for the man, personally and professionally. And the movie tries to show both of those sides of him in parallel, but there's so much overlap between the two. So many themes overlap between his personal life and his private life that it's almost hard to separate. And so I'll talk about both, and I'll talk about those themes that permeate through both. But for context, the film is sort of leading up to the 1957 Mila. I think it's just Mila. Mia. Look, I just don't want to become that girl on TikTok who tried to say Aglio and Elio, but she tried to say it in Italian, and she was like, Aglio, Elio. And now the entire internet's making fun of her because she overdid it. Not trying to make that happen, but this race has a lot of L's in it, and I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce them. So maybe it's Mia, or maybe it's Mila, or maybe it's Mila. Anyway, it's a 1,000-mile round-trip race on Italian public roads that happened every single year up until, 1957, when the result was so traumatic that the Italian government has still not recovered. So in 1957, a Ferrari driver, Alfonso de Portago, snagged something on the road just 40-ish miles from the finish line, but it popped his tire, which, to be fair, 40 miles from the finish line of a 1,000-mile race, those tires were tired, but they popped, and it sent him flying. He hit a telephone pole, hit spectators, and then landed in a river. 10 spectators died, 5 of them were kids, and over 20 people were injured. And the movie doesn't end up showing this, but just for some real-life context, history spoiler, Enzo did go to court. He was sued for manslaughter or unintentional manslaughter, some form of manslaughter, but was found not guilty as they were able to prove that the accident was caused by the tire ripping due to something on the road rather than a car error or an engineering mistake, which, to be fair, do not blame the Italian people for thinking it was an engineering mistake. But anyway, this race was sort of like the very end of the film. The rest of the film focuses on Enzo building cars, testing cars, promoting the cars through media, assembling a team of drivers, coaching them, and all of that is set to all of the things happening in his personal life. And I do think that the personal stuff was meant to humanize Enzo. Not sure they succeeded, but a lot of the same themes show up in both sides of his life at the time. First of all, his selfishness. He puts his needs and wants above everyone else's at all times, and his only need and want in life is to create the perfectly engineered car. And his die-hard belief that nothing is better than Ferrari and anything that's wrong with the Ferrari is not Ferrari's fault. But anyway, this selfishness is very evident in his personal relationships as well, particularly with his wife, Laura. So basically, context on his personal life, Enzo lives in Modena / Maranello, where Maranello is where the factory is, Modena is where he grew up. Pretty sure his residence is in Maranello, but I think those two are so close to each other that it's just like basically one entity in his life. And the only thing not in Modena / Maranello is his mistress and child that live slightly outside of both of those towns. His mistress is played by Shailene Woodley, who seems to have spent the entire film debating whether she should have an Italian accent. And she also seemed to change her mind every 2 words. So she's like, says one word with an Italian accent and then goes straight into an American accent. And just really couldn't seem to make up her mind. She just should have stuck to American because she clearly cannot commit to an Italian accent. On the other side, we have his actual wife, played by Penelope Cruz, who is so good in this movie. They really tried to make her look disheveled, bordering a mental breakdown, frumpy, but it's Penelope Cruz, so she's just a beautiful woman who looks distressed. She lives in their Maranello residence, and she's in charge of the finances for Ferrari, which struggle all on its own. And she also is his wife. So she fields like all his calls, and there are a lot of calls, like all day. Literally, anytime someone sees a race car driver, like in Italy, they'll call Ferrari. They'll call Enzo, and Penelope will pick up. She's like, oh yes, I will tell him, and then hangs up like really angry because he's not there. He was sleeping at his mistress's house. And she's like pacing back and forth. And then when he finally graces her with his presence, she shoots at him. I think she has actually pretty good aim. She just wasn't aiming at him. But she leaves and walks by his mother, who like stares at her, and she's like, the fuck? And she's like, I let him live. Telling you, Penelope was iconic, and I really hope Laura Ferrari was actually equally as iconic as Penelope Cruz portrayed her to be. To put up with Enzo, though, you do have to be quite the woman. Like, he sucks. He's a genius, but he sucks. In his career, this selfishness is reflected in his finances, sort of, because like he is like only committed to creating the most perfect car ever. He is driven by perfectionism, and as a result, the finances suffer because he puts all of his money into creating the perfect race car. He could be putting more money into creating more road cars. I think they produce like 10 in a year at the time, and so that he could fund F1, but he doesn't really do that, or he does do that, but not at the speed at which he could, because even his road cars, he wants to be flawless. So the result is 10 a year. There's a literal quote from his business partner who says, "I could run Portugal on the amount you spend on racing." This was basically during a conversation where his partner was telling him he's broke AF because he spends all his money and doesn't make anything, and he needs to sell the company in order to be funded. And he starts naming potential buyers. One of these potential buyers is Jaguar, to which Enzo responds, "Jaguar races to sell cars. I sell cars to race. We are completely different organisms." Which, fair. Ferrari still, although they are producing more than 10 cars a year now, they still, in theory, sell road cars to race. Like, I think they made more, I think I read somewhere that they made more money off of merch than they did off of their road cars, which they could make more of if they, made more cars. And this is also, like, we've seen this story before, like, one of the other options to sell to is Ford, which, like, greatly insults Enzo that he would ever sell to an American, let alone Ford, who, like, shuffles out, like, thousands of cars a year because of the whole efficiency thing, God forbid. And to put into pop culture context, Ford versus Ferrari, the film, was focused on the 1963 24-hour Le Mans, which is 6 years later. Ford, considering to buy Ferrari, they go all the way to Italy to meet with them, and then they find out that Enzo used that to stage, was that a flashback? I don't think it was a flashback. Maybe it was. Assuming it wasn't a flashback, it basically took 6 years for Enzo to actually sell the company, which is when Ford came to visit in order to, like, make Fiat jealous or whatever, and to buy Ferrari. And then Ford got really angry and was like, "We're going to beat you at Le Mans and show you what's what." Unless it took them 6 years in order to be able to beat them at Le Mans, but I don't think that's true. This film had some foreshadowing for that film, which was that Enzo is super broke, and also that Enzo's an asshole because he, like, chewed Ford out in that film. To be fair, Ford was not great. No one really liked Ford, but, like, Enzo was a pretentious asshole, and he's still a pretentious asshole, and, like, the only thing that matters to him is the Ferrari racing car, his name, his reputation, his pride, etc., etc. He lives and breathes racing. Anyways, my point was that these two concepts start bleeding into one another, as Laura, his wife, is the one who manages his finances and also owns half of the Ferrari shares, which they did during the war in case something happened to Enzo or something. So that she could still, like, manage and run Ferrari in his absence. By the way, the Ferrari factory got bombed during the war, so they had to rebuild the whole thing. So a big part of what his business partner tells him is that if Laura sells him her share of Ferrari, he has more leverage with selling the company. Anyway, he needs her share of Ferrari, which is kind of rude because she basically runs this company. So half of this film is him trying to get her to sell him her Ferrari shares. But, like, another factor that comes into this is that while she's managing his finances, she finds out that he has a second residence outside of Modena/Maranello. They have, like, a summer home somewhere else. And then she finds out he has another home. So she goes and visits it. The banker pretends it's like a slip up of the tongue and that there isn't a second residence, but she goes and checks, sees that he has a mistress and a child. And it, like, literally breaks her heart because even though they're, like, pretty estranged and she's assumed this whole time he's sleeping around, I think she had an easier time accepting that he was just sleeping around with a bunch of people rather than having, like, a single mistress that he's in love with and has a second child with, particularly in the context of their son's death, which I'll get to in a moment. So anyway, Lara agrees to sell him her shares of Ferrari for $500,000 or 500,000 lira. Enzo agrees on the condition that she doesn't cash the check before he has a chance to make a deal with Fiat. And she reluctantly agrees, but when she finds out about this child, she gets really angry. She starts thinking, like, am I going to do this? Am I not going to do this? Blah, 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 blah. She ends up cashing the check but tells him she will give him it back as a loan, not even with the only condition being, and it's not like a firm condition, but it's a request that he does honor, that the child doesn't take the Ferrari name until she's dead. And Enzo basically ends up agreeing, and his son Pietro, who we'll talk about in a minute, and only takes the Ferrari name in like the 70s after Lara dies. And but he's already been super involved in the Ferrari business. He's an engineer. He works on the F1 side of things. And anyway, he still owns a part of it. And if you Google it, you can catch him with baby Charles. He also looks a lot like Enzo. Anyways, but this leads me to the other big theme in the film, which is death. The entire movie is just defined by death after death after death. In his personal life, the biggest catalyst for so much emotional turmoil between Laura and Enzo and this illegitimate child, it all stems from the death of their son Dino. And if that name sounds familiar, it is because the Emilia Romagna track is named Autodromo Enzo and Dino Ferrari. It used to be just Dino Ferrari, but once Enzo passed away, they added his name in as well. Dino died very young, around 24 years old, from muscular dystrophy. Nothing could be done about the situation. Honestly, whenever I just had assumed that because the track was named after him that he had died in a racing incident, but he didn't even race. He was more of an engineer like his father. So his father did race, and I don't know if Dino never even attempted because of the muscular dystrophy, but he was a very good engineer. He was designing things up to like his death, basically in his hospital bed. The death tore the Ferraris apart, but it's also what kept them together in this like toxic non-relationship that neither of them seem to be able to let go of. Of course, part of this is also the fact that divorce is illegal in Italy at this time, so they literally couldn't let go of each other. But I do think that aside, Dino continues to tie them together, and like any respect Enzo shows Lara is more for Dino's sake than actually any contributions she may have made to Ferrari as a whole. His mother is an asshole. His mother is hilarious, but she's an asshole. At one point she talks about Enzo's dead brother and says the wrong brother died and like all of this stuff. She's a bitch to Lara. When Lara finds out about the illegitimate child, she's like, did you know? She's like, of course I knew. He needs an heir. And she's like, I gave him an heir. And she's like, yeah, you didn't really. And Lara's like, I did give him an heir. I felt really bad for Lara. Penelope Cruz is incredible. Anyway, like Enzo does not love her anymore, clearly, but he does love Dino, and she is a part of Dino, and that like keeps him with her and keeps him respecting her wishes. I firmly believe. Like Dino is so integrated into their lives despite being gone. Like the entire first sequence of the movie, like maybe 10 minutes of it, of him like leaving his mistress's house, going home, going to the barber's, going to the shop to get flowers, all of that, it turns out, was leading up to him visiting Dino in the cemetery, where he has a conversation with him, and the entire family goes every single day to visit Dino in the cemetery. Laura, the mother, him, they all go every single day to visit and talk to Dino, which is very sweet and was very sad. I do think that Dino, not only, like for a long time, whenever Shailene Woodley would ask, because like Shailene Woodley's biggest gripe was that her son needs a last name, and the son kept asking, is my last name Ferrari? Is it your last name? And Shailene Woodley kept asking Enzo, what's his last name? What's his last name? And he kept saying, Lara can't know about this. We have to keep it a secret. But really, I think it was also him scared of disrespecting Dino's memory, which is also like why he didn't really want to involve the boy in the car side of things. Even like when the boy tried to ask for an autograph of one of his drivers, he didn't give it to him like until the last minute. Like he asked him like 7 times, and every time he's like, I'll get it. Like I don't think he could accept him being involved in that side because he was still so attached to Dino and the Laura thing. But like I think it's really his attachment to Dino. But the end of the film kind of wraps that up nicely because it shows him leading Pietro to meet his brother, and he takes him to the cemetery to introduce him to Dino, and it's really sad. And then that's also right before then he gives him the autograph that he managed to get for him right before Alfonso burst into a million pieces. But it's sort of a full circle moment. And we do know that Pietro was super involved in Ferrari, as I said. So he does come around to it eventually, but seeing him struggle with that was sad because he loved his son. But this leads me to the other death in this film. And there's a fucking lot of it. Like in in his professional life, the other half of this movie, the way to describe motor racing is a deadly passion, a terrible joy, which like at the time, motor racing was a death trap for everyone involved. There was literally someone dying every other day. I don't think there was, honestly, I need to get the stats on up until safety became like a priority. Like over the first 20 years of F1, 20, 30 years, how many people died a week? How many races saw at least one dead person? And also the spectators, like the drivers, yeah. And then there's the spectators that would die as a result because they were just like on the track. The very first racing death we see, I actually think is also a very pivotal scene in telling us who Enzo is as a human being. Right before that scene, there's a scene in a church where the entire congregation, which as we can assume the entire congregation is basically all Ferrari engineers and employees. They're all sitting listening to a sermon with their stopwatch out because that day everyone knew that their biggest competitor at the time, Maserati, who operated in the same area, was doing a practice session and they were planning on setting the new fastest time. Also, what? Like, private practice sessions is there like a private thing where current F1 teams are like competing in terms of their practice session? Because I've never heard of that. But like, they all knew there was going to be this private practice session where they're going to set a fastest time with their new car. And they were all waiting to time it to see if they need to top it. So they're sitting in church with their stopwatches out. I guess Maserati was not a religious team. And I also guess the town is so small that it's close enough to the track that you can hear the car. So they could, based on the sound of the engine of the car going around the track, they were able to time it to see if the Maserati driver beat their record, which he did. And as soon as church ended, they all ran to the track to beat the time. So they're all at this track. There's like a yellow truck that says Ferrari on it, which is kind of hilarious. And they're all on this track trying to beat this time that Maserati set like 15 minutes ago. And this man, Alfonso de Portago, shows up, who actually tried to get Enzo's attention on the road. And Enzo just drove off. Literally, he was like, I saw you at the stoplight. And then just like, the light turned green. What can I do? So he comes to the track, which apparently private practice sessions are actually open practice sessions. I don't know. So Alfonso shows up and he's like, I want to be, by the way, sorry, just background on Alfonso de Portago. He is a Spanish aristocrat, driver enthusiast, and he wants to be an F1 driver. I don't know if he was already like a driver, but he wants to be a driver. And so he was also in the media known as like sort of the first sex symbol in racing. Like his love life was reported on endlessly in the media. And there's actually one really fun scene where Enzo was trying to figure out his dating history. Like him and his friend were having like wine or whatever, and they were trying to figure out what Alfonso's dating history is. And it's so box coded. Like F1 fangirls meet Enzo, basically was that scene. But anyways, back to this scene in the practice session. Alfonso shows up and he's like, Enzo is like focused on his driver, whose name was Eugenio Castellotti. He was focused on him, and he, by the way, called him. He's like, you must beat this time. Eugenio's in bed with his fiance girlfriend, who they both show up on track in like regular clothes, pops a helmet on, hops in this car and starts setting times. Enzo's like dead focused on this, and Alfonso comes up. He's like, hey, I want a job as a driver. And Enzo's like, I have a driver. And Alfonso's like, okay, but like you could have another driver. And they're all standing around watching Eugenio set try to set a new time. His girlfriend is there, or fiance, who they changed her name in the movie, but the real woman's name was Delia Scalia, OG Wag, bless up. They're all sitting around watching Eugenio try to set this time, and Eugenio hits a curb, flies straight out of the cockpit, like 100 meters, hits a rock and is dead. Delia is standing there like on the verge of a mental breakdown. The entire Ferrari team of engineers are like just staring at what the fuck they just saw. And Enzo turns to Alfonso and goes, "Come to my office on Monday." Like, his driver just died in front of his face and he's already hired another driver? What? And when he's talking about it later, he's discussing it later with Laura when he's trying to get money that he doesn't have to pay the fiance, because like he's like, it's our kind of fault that he died. He also mentions this quote might be the wildest thing I've ever heard. I think Laura, out of anger, was like, "You killed him," and he was like, "I didn't kill him. His mother killed him. His mother meddled in his love life. He got distracted, and when a mother interferes in business, death usually follows." That's a wild thing to say in general, especially after someone dies in your car. I understand he hit a curb, but like, bro, I know they experienced a lot of death in those days, and sometimes the best way to deal with it is to sort of disassociate. Sometimes when death is so part of your job, like the best way to handle it, like soldiers or doctors or whatever, like to disassociate with it so it's not eating you up every second of every day. I get that, and I get that he had to develop, like after he like talked about it, like when your friends die every other day, like you have to like learn to live with it. But I still think this scene is a very good representation of Enzo, because all he cared about was racing. And as someone is like dead in front of his face, he's already hiring his replacement, you know? Like, Ferrari racing car is all he cares about. He lives and dies by it. Or I guess others die by it. But life and death, that's all it is for him. All right, moving on from the movie, I want to talk about some of my favorite moments and also how they pertain to like F1 today. But the first thing I have to talk about, is the special effects. So like, I remember I watched the Grand Prix, which is a film from 1966. And when we talked about it on the pod, like I thought it was so funny the way they demonstrated death. Cause like they literally just threw a doll in front of the camera into like rocks. And we're like, oh, he's dead. And at the time I thought it was like lack of special effects in 1966. And that's the only way they knew how to demonstrate death, was to like throw something out of a toy car in front of the camera and pretend that it was like a real life person. I'm not sure that it was like a time, like an era constraint, you know, like because Michael Mann has access to all the best technology, special effects, whatever in the world. And his car deaths looked exactly the same as they did in 1966. It looked like a doll was just thrown into some rocks or into a tree, or like when they showed Alfonso dead at the end, it kind of just looked like he was a doll. I don't know if that's to demonstrate how lifeless a driver will look when they were thrown from a car in that time period. I don't know if that's the purpose. There's no reason, unless it's intentional, for Michael Mann to demonstrate death in this way. I just can't figure out what the intention was, because it looks ridiculous. And like, I feel like if they had made it look more realistic, there would be more of an emotional tie to it, because these deaths are tragic. But when it looks like a doll is being thrown off camera somewhere, it just kind of made me giggle. And I don't want to be giggling at these people's deaths, you know? Anyway, I think what the movie captured really well is the attitude and the approach to racing that both Ferrari, the team, and its fans, like the Tifosi, have even today. One thing that I think was really funny was like halfway through the last race, the Mila Mia, whatever, the 1,000-mile race, was one of the drivers took a bite out of a banana before jumping back into the car and continuing to race. And he like threw the banana at an engineer, and then that engineer handed the banana off to another engineer, and that engineer handed it off to another engineer. And then someone just like handed it to a child and was like, do you want Colin's banana? And the child was like, yeah, I want Colin's banana. And it's just so like fangirl coded. Like, imagine Charles's half-eaten banana and how well it would do on eBay. So well. Okay, so another thing, so this is in the church scene where everyone had their stopwatches out and the priest is giving his sermon, and one of the things he says, if Jesus had been born today, he would have been a Ferrari engineer. That is a wild thing for a man of God to say. That is like low-key blasphemous. I am slightly shocked that he would utter those words, but I guess if you live in Maranello, there are no carpenters, there are just Ferrari engineers, so know your audience, I guess. But I actually think he fully believed it. Anyway, another thing that was so funny to me was the rivalry between Enzo and the football manager that was in the area. I don't know what team it was. I tried to find what team it would have been. The Emilia Romagna team? I don't know. They're both in like a barber shop getting their hair cut, and they're like shit talking each other. And the football manager says that his team is the pride of Emilia, and Enzo replies, I have to move my factory because your failure dispirits my drivers. Great line. Also, the Ferrari attitude in general of like, we are Ferrari, we are the best, and if something goes wrong, it's not our fault, it's your fault. And they're so focused on a perfect car that nothing else really matters. And the things that they say to the drivers is like absolutely wild to me. Like, and there are things that would never be said today. For example, like there was that scene after one of the Grand Prix where all the drivers are in a restaurant together. It's that famous restaurant in Maranello right next to the factory that Enzo always ate at. And Enzo was like pissed off. He's yelling at all of them. The driver next to him is wearing a neck brace. And Enzo's like, you do not have enough commitment to this team. You do not care enough. Blah, 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 blah. Can you imagine like after Daniel Ricciardo broke his wrist and had to get surgery, and Franz Toast was like, you do not have enough commitment to this team. Fuck you. That is wild. Also, Enzo's advice before a race to one of his drivers was get the win, brake later, steal their line. You brake when you're supposed to brake, not after you win. That is terrible advice. Another hot tip, not from Enzo, just in general, that made me laugh, that would never be said today, was get the gasoline in the car, not on the driver. They were really rushing their pit stops. Anyway, halfway through the whatever, the 1,000-mile race, at one of the stops, the engineers are like trying to tell Enzo that the car is fucking destroyed and cannot be driven anymore. And the driver is listening to all this, and Enzo's like, nah, it's fine. You can still win. Go, go, go. Bro, safety first. Another thing, paddock culture. So some things are the same, I think, like in terms of like, I think the relationship with the media. I love how people hated the media then, they hate them now, but like it's a necessary evil. Like Enzo knows everyone by name. He tries to forge like a personal relationship with all of the journalists, but I think it's so funny that like after like something was reported, he was mad about the way they talked about him, so he kicked a bunch of journalists out by like individually quoting what they said about him and being like, no, you can't be here, bye. Imagine if that happened today. Imagine if Max was like, I don't like what you wrote about me, get the fuck out. Also, I think that another thing that was really interesting was we saw Enzo strike a deal with one of the journalists to print that Ford is trying to buy Ferrari, but Enzo is categorically denying it. And the journalist agreed on the condition that Enzo would give him a personal interview, like about himself. And Enzo agrees on the condition that the journalist doesn't print it until he lets him, which honestly is a shit deal for the journalist. I don't know why he agreed. But again, foreshadowing for Ford versus Ferrari. But anyway, another thing that I think is the same is a lot of the personality traits in drivers are kind of similar. Their ego, their like thrill-seeking, whatever. Obviously, now it's a lot safer to be thrill-seeking, but whatever. I also saw, like, in Patrick Dempsey's character, who was like the oldest driver on the Ferrari team, I saw a lot of Fernando in him. Also, by the way, he won the Mille Miglia, and that was the last race he ever raced, because I think the whole 10 dead people was a little much for him. And Alfonso, the Spanish aristocrat who's rich and a playboy, is obviously Carlos. But it might also just be because he's rich Spanish and drives cars and has a hot girlfriend. Anyway, the other thing that I thought was hilarious was the rivalries between teams. That's still alive and well. Like during the Mille Miglia, whatever. One of the Maserati drivers loses his car, like in the middle of a random field. And so he's just standing on the side of the road being like, how the fuck am I getting home? And then one of the Ferrari drivers pulls up and he's like, yeah, get in. By the way, the cars that were used for this were a bit bigger than an F1 car, and they could fit 2 people in it because a lot of the times they had navigators so they wouldn't get lost. So this guy had an empty seat. He didn't have a navigator. And he's like, yeah, get in. So he gets in and he gets dropped off at the next pit stop in whatever the next town is. And the look on the Maserati team principal's face was of shock and horror. And he's like, what the hell happened? He's like, well, I lost the car and I needed to get here somehow. And he goes, a passenger in a Ferrari? You should have walked like 60 miles, sir. Anyway, another thing is the WAGs concept. And this like kills me. When Alfonso gets the job, he's already dating this American actress. And Enzo tells him, actresses, I admire them, but keep them away from the paddock. They distract the photographers who I want to focus on our cars. Which is hilarious because Enzo would hate the modern day grid walk, paddock, culture, environment surrounding F1. The amount of actresses that are watching the F1, he would not be happy. There's also this one scene where Alfonso's girlfriend, the American actress, comes to visit when the media is at the Maranello factory and they're doing interviews. But when she arrives, they like stop focusing on the cars and on Enzo and they start focusing on her and taking pictures of her. So Enzo's like, oh my God, let's take a picture all together in front of this Ferrari. And so him, Alfonso, and the actress all stand together in front of the Ferrari. And he like puts his arm around the actress and like pulls her into him, and it's like low-key assault. Like I'm like, why is he grabbing this woman's ass on camera? And then I realized he's not grabbing her ass to grab her ass. She was leaning against the Ferrari logo and he like pulled her in so that the logo would be in the photo, and I thought it was hilarious. Anyway, that's all my thoughts, I think, on the Ferrari film. It was a great movie. I thought Adam Driver did great despite his face. He's got the name for this film. I thought Penelope Cruz was amazing. I thought Shailene Woodley should never attempt an accent again. And I'm surprised that it hasn't gotten any nominations at all. At least a couple. It should have. But good film, and it was really fun to see how F1 and Ferrari specifically has changed over the years. I don't know how Enzo would feel about Charles. I don't know how Charles would feel about Enzo. But they're both very committed to Ferrari, so there's that. But like, Enzo was an asshole and a genius, but an asshole. But I would think that after so many years have passed, they could implement some sort of change. Like perhaps we could shift the philosophy a little so that maybe Charles and Carlos could have a fighting chance. Just a thought. Anyways, the next episode is either going to be a review of Drive to Survive or the 2024 season primer, walking through who's who, what's what, etc., etc. I haven't decided which will come first, but expect those in a few weeks. And then we're going full send into the 2024 season. There are 24 races. That's a lot. Anyway, cannot wait. Until then, comment, review, and share with potential boxes. And make sure you follow along on social at BoxBoxF1Pod to keep up between episodes. See you soon. Box.